My mom and brother took $47,000 from me over 5 years while playing victim, so I let their house of cards collapse. Now I own multiple properties and they're asking me to drop the fraud charges. Stop being selfish was the motto I was forced to live by since I was a child. When I was 9, I started a yard sale all by myself, selling every birthday and Christmas toy I owned, and I made just short of $100. I thought my family would be proud, but when I announced it to everyone at dinner, my mom only asked, "How much is being given to your brother?" My brother was 8, but she made me feel guilty, so I gave him $20. I thought he'd give me a thank you, but the mofo just looked at mom with this "I'm waiting" look, so I wound up giving him $80. On some level, I knew it wasn't fair, but still I gave it to him. All I wanted was my mom's approval no matter what. Now I'm 27 years old and last week, and I can now confidently say I'm financially stable. I got a bunch of zeros in my savings account and a 401k, which might not sound like much, but to me, an ex-shopaholic, it's a very big deal. And of course, I didn't want to be selfish. So at the last family gathering, I came with a very big announcement. This Airbnb expert at my job was looking for someone to invest in a house renovation with him, and in exchange, they'd receive 10 times the amount in passive income every year for the rest of their lives. I could have signed up myself, but I wanted to give the opportunity to Trent. On the way there, I kept telling myself that this was the last key I needed to prove that, once and for all, I was not selfish. But of course, my hopes were shattered, because when I got to my mom's house, Trent opened the door. "Did mom tell you my laptop broke a few months ago?" I stared at him blankly, and he just sighed. "Mom, I told you Maggie would forget to buy me a new MacBook." I heard footsteps, and suddenly my mom was beside him. They both stood with their arms crossed, and my mom told me that if I was going to be selfish and not buy my younger brother new things, then I didn't even deserve a nice job, car, or anything. And before I could explain why I came empty-handed and tell him about the Airbnb that would make him an extra $5,000 a year, he chimed in. "Maggie, I've always protected you at school. Remember the bullies?" I did remember, because he never let me forget. You see, in high school, I was tormented all day, every day. And one time my brother threatened them to stop, so they did. But it only lasted one day. Still, he raves about it to me and my mom, talking about it like he was a great Roman soldier. And I know this might sound pathetic, but I wasn't even angry. I just felt tears sting my eyes. My fingers clutched the brand new iPhone in my pocket that I had gotten from my mom, and as I was about to give it to them, they kept going. "You know your brother Trent just got fired from his role as cashier at the local Quick Check. 10 years of employment down the drain. How do you plan to support us during this?" In an instant, my sadness turned to anger. I stared at the entitled faces of my family. Not once during this whole ordeal was I invited inside. I thought about my friends' families that I had been introduced to, how they were always warmly greeted with a hug, never yelled at, never made to cry, never treated like the family slave. I took a deep breath and asked them if they had any gifts for me. My brother rolled his eyes. "It's always about you, isn't it, Maggie?" I kept a completely stoic expression while he retrieved it. The gift in question ended up being a discount coupon for a milkshake at Burger King. I'm lactose intolerant. Well, that was enough for me. I kept my gifts to myself and walked back towards my car. The second I turned the corner, I broke down. I thought back to all the times I gave into their BS demands, all the times I chose them instead of me. I think that moment was the first time I actually let myself feel angry, and for once, I wanted to do something about it. I turned the car around, left my mom's new iPhone in the car, and walked up the driveway. Again, Trent answered the door. "Glad you're done with your little temper tantrum. Now let me ask again. Where are our gift?" "Hey Trent," I interrupted. "Who pays for your phone bill?" "Mom's boyfriend," he answered. I knew he was confused. "What about your gas? Your health insurance? Who covers your weekend food deliveries? Or your premium coffee subscription?" The smirk was wiped from his face, and that's when my mom came. "Hey mom, who pays for your guy's rent? Who pays off the car insurance?" They both turned to look at each other, and had the "oh wait" look plastered on their faces. You see, I had previously told Trent that my mom's boyfriend was covering his payments, because I knew that would help him like him more. And when my mom was on the verge of kicking out Trent, I told her Trent was paying off the bills. I didn't even stick around to explain. I just left. And even though I felt like a badass, it was still really hard. So I spent the entire night bawling my eyes out. And when I woke up, I noticed my phone had been bombarded with dozens of texts and missed calls. The first voicemail was angry. The second was threatening. By the 10th, they were practically begging to talk about this rationally. I deleted the voicemails without listening to the rest. My hands shook as I scrolled through the texts. Variations of the same theme. Trent calling me ungrateful. Mom saying I destroyed the family. Then came the Facebook notifications. My phone screen lit up with alert after alert. Trent had posted about his heartless sister abandoning family in their time of need. The notification count climbed rapidly. 47 missed calls, 83 texts. I switched my phone to silent and watched the numbers rise. Sarah texted me asking if everything was okay. Apparently my mother had messaged her claiming I'd had some kind of breakdown, and they were worried about my mental health. The manipulation disguised as concern made my stomach turn. I started taking screenshots of every threatening message, every guilt trip, every lie. My fingers moved methodically as I backed everything up to cloud storage. Then I noticed something that made my blood run cold. LinkedIn notifications. Trent had already contacted 3 of my coworkers. My phone rang. Sarah's name flashed on the screen. I answered on the second ring. She sounded confused, explaining my mother's message about my supposed mental state. I realized I needed to get ahead of this narrative before it spiraled further. I invited Sarah over and showed her everything. Years of Venmo transactions, bank statements I'd kept, receipts for their rent payments. Her shock morphed into anger as she scrolled through the evidence of systematic exploitation. Sarah warned me that my mom was already calling other mutual friends with her version of events. The damage control had begun on their end, and I needed to protect myself. I checked my banking apps and discovered my mother attempting to reset the password on our joint checking account, the one we'd opened when I was 18 for emergencies. My heart pounded as I grabbed my keys. The drive to the bank felt endless. I burst through the doors to find my mother already inside, speaking earnestly to a manager about her concerns for her daughter's mental state. The bank manager recognized me. We'd worked together on several transactions over the years. He listened as I calmly explained the situation, showing him my ID and account information. Despite my mother's loud protests about her mentally unstable daughter, he helped me freeze the account and remove her access. My mother switched tactics instantly, turning to other bank customers with tears streaming down her face. She wailed about her daughter having an episode and cutting off her poor unemployed brother. I spent the next hour securing all my financial accounts, changing every password, adding 2-factor authentication. While updating my security questions, I discovered my mother had been logging into my old email account, the one I'd used in high school. The next morning, I pulled into my workplace parking lot to find Trent leaning against my designated spot. He straightened when he saw my car, claiming he just wanted to talk things through like adults. I locked my car doors and called security. He left before they arrived, but the message was clear. They knew where I worked. Jake picked me up for for lunch and I tried explaining the situation. He suggested I shouldn't let money come between family, clearly not grasping the full scope of what was happening. I pulled out my phone and showed him the documentation. While organizing old messages for evidence, I found texts from when I was 16. My mom had promised to pay me back for covering Trent's car insurance just this once. That was 11 years ago. The harassment escalated. My mother started messaging my coworkers on social media, claiming a family emergency and asking them to check on my fragile mental state. 3 separate colleagues approached me with concern. My boss pulled me aside the next day. She'd received messages about a family emergency my mother had described in alarming detail. I had to explain the situation professionally, showing her just enough evidence to prove I was fine without oversharing. I called Emma, my childhood friend who'd become a therapist, hoping for support. Instead, she dismissed my concerns because your mom was always so sweet to me growing up. The outsider's bias stung more than I expected. That evening, I created a comprehensive spreadsheet documenting 5 years of financial support. The total made me nauseous. Over $47,000. Every Venmo transaction, every check, every cash withdrawal meticulously recorded. While organizing receipts, I found something that changed everything. A credit card statement I'd been copied on showed my mother's purchase history. Last month, she'd bought a MacBook Pro. The same month, she claimed they couldn't afford groceries. I stared at the evidence of the lie that had started this whole confrontation. She'd bought the laptop Trent wanted, but made me the villain for not providing it. Jake came over that night and I showed him the full documentation. His face paled as he scrolled through the evidence. He apologized for his earlier comment, then mentioned his own family had asked about my mental health after my mother called them. The poison was spreading to every corner of my life. The pattern became crystal clear as I reviewed everything. Create a crisis. Demand rescue. Claim victimhood when refused. Rinse and repeat for over a decade. My phone rang. Aunt Patricia's name surprised me. We rarely spoke directly. She'd noticed inconsistencies in her sister's stories about me over the years and wanted to hear my side. I met Patricia for coffee and showed her the Venmo history, the recent messages, the credit card statement. Her expression hardened as she absorbed the evidence. For the first time, a blood relative saw the truth. My mother's attempt to turn the extended family against me began backfiring. Patricia started asking questions at family gatherings, pointing out contradictions in the narrative. A text popped up from my cousin Marcus. Did you really pay their rent for 3 years? The truth was beginning to surface. I replied to Marcus with a simple yes and attached screenshots of the bank transfers. Within minutes, he forwarded them to other cousins who'd been wondering about the family dynamics. Trent's next move caught me off guard. He created a GoFundMe page titled, "Help My Mother and I Avoid Homelessness After Family Abandonment." The main photo showed us as children, me pushing him on a swing, both of us smiling. The description painted me as a wealthy sister who'd cruelly cut off her struggling family. He'd already shared it across multiple social media platforms. The public exploitation felt like a punch to the gut. This was their nuclear option, weaponizing strangers' sympathy to force my compliance through shame. I recognized the tactic immediately. They'd done smaller versions before, telling sob stories to mutual acquaintances, but never on this scale. Sarah's husband Tom called me that afternoon. He'd seen something interesting at the casino last week. Trent at the high-stakes poker table, betting hundreds per hand. Tom had taken a photo because he couldn't believe it. The timestamp showed it was 3 days after Trent claimed to be desperately broke. My grandmother's call came as I was processing this information. She'd received 3 different versions of events. One from my mother, one from Trent, and one from Aunt Patricia. The stories didn't align, and she wanted to hear directly from me. I drove to her house with my folder of evidence. Sitting in her kitchen, I spread out the documentation, bank statements, Venmo transactions, text messages spanning years. My grandmother's weathered hands trembled as she reviewed the papers. She asked me to play the voicemails I'd saved. My mother's voice alternated between calling me mentally ill when speaking to others and cruel when addressing me directly. The manipulation tactics shifted based on the intended audience. A knock at my apartment door the next evening made my heart race. Through the peephole, I saw 2 police officers. They explained they were conducting a wellness check requested by a concerned family member. I invited them in, showed my ID, and calmly explained the situation. They took notes, confirmed I was fine, and left within 10 minutes. But the message was clear. My mother was escalating her tactics. Jake's family started piecing things together too. His mother remembered odd comments my mom had made at dinners, always mentioning how generous I was, how I took care of everything, but in a way that seemed more like marking territory than expressing gratitude. The pattern recognition spread through our social circles. My phone buzzed with a Facebook message from someone I didn't recognize. Trent's former coworker from QuickCheck wanted me to know something. Trent hadn't been fired last week as claimed. He'd been terminated 3 months ago. The coworker had stayed quiet until seeing the GoFundMe page, which struck him as exploitative given what he knew. More messages followed. Our former neighbor reached out, sharing how my mother had borrowed $500 years ago for Maggie's college expenses. The neighbor found it odd since she knew I had full academic scholarships. She'd never mentioned it before, assuming it was none of her business, but the current situation made her reconsider. I maintained my composure when responding to family inquiries, sticking to facts and documentation. Several relatives noted the contrast between my measured responses and my mother's increasingly hysterical messages. The comparison spoke volumes. The calendar on my wall circled the first of the month in red. Rent day, bill day, the natural deadline that would force their hand. I wondered what their next move would be as the date approached. Trent's ex-girlfriend contacted me through Instagram. She shared screenshots of old conversations where he described me as jealous of him, warning her that I might make up stories about the family. The preemptive discrediting dated back 2 years. They'd been preparing for this possibility long before I'd cut them off. A family barbecue at my cousin's house became an unexpected stage for drama. My mother arrived uninvited, tears already flowing. When someone innocently asked about Trent's job search, she broke down completely. The performance cracked under scrutiny when she couldn't keep her story straight about when he'd been fired. Through tears, she made an offer. She would forgive everything if I just covered 1 more month of expenses. Just 1 month to get back on their feet. The same promise she'd made dozens of times before. My phone lit up with texts from 3 different family members within an hour of the barbecue. Each sent variations of the same message. My mom's story wasn't adding up. The cracks in her narrative were becoming chasms. While reviewing tax documents for my accountant, I noticed something troubling. My mother had been claiming me as a dependent on her taxes, but I'd never signed any forms authorizing this. My accountant's expression grew serious as he explained this could constitute tax fraud. I sat with this information, unsure how to proceed. The GoFundMe stalled at $200, mostly from 2 distant relatives who hadn't heard my side. The lack of traction seemed to frustrate Trent, who posted increasingly desperate updates. My mother's boyfriend, now ex-boyfriend, reached out with his own revelation. He'd been giving her $1,400 monthly to help with expenses, believing he was supplementing their tight budget. He had no idea she was also taking money from me. The double dipping had funded a lifestyle beyond their means. Sarah organized a girls' night, refusing to let me isolate myself. Her living room filled with friends who'd experienced their own versions of toxic family dynamics. Their stories and support reminded me I wasn't alone in this struggle. Jake confronted his own tendency to enable, recognizing how his initial response had minimized my situation. We grew stronger as he worked to understand and support my boundaries. His evolution from skeptic to advocate strengthened our relationship. I made a conscious choice not to mention the tax fraud discovery to anyone. Despite the temptation to use it as leverage, I refused to weaponize information the way they had. Some lines I wouldn't cross. A chance encounter at Target turned revealing. I rounded the corner to find Trent in the electronics section, his cart full of video games and expensive alcohol. He saw me and immediately launched into complaints about job hunting. The lies were visible in his shopping cart. Aunt Patricia confirmed what I'd suspected. She'd paid for Trent's car repairs last year after he'd spun a similar tale of desperation. The pattern extended beyond just me. They'd been working multiple relatives simultaneously. Two cousins admitted they'd started avoiding family gatherings because of constant money requests. They'd been too embarrassed to say anything, assuming they were the only ones being targeted. The isolation had been part of the strategy. Family group chat messages revealed relatives had been quietly comparing notes about loan requests for months. The hidden network of concern had existed parallel to the public narrative of family harmony. My boss offered employee assistance program counseling resources, recognizing the signs of someone dealing with family manipulation. She'd navigated similar dynamics with her own relatives and understood the complexity. My mother cornered me at the grocery store, catching me off guard in the cereal aisle. She admitted Trent had some issues but insisted I should help because family helps family. The same circular logic that had trapped me for years. Church friends started reaching out after noticing inconsistencies in my mother's prayer requests. She'd asked for prayers for her mentally ill daughter one week and her cruel daughter the next. The congregation began questioning which version was true. Her ex-boyfriend forwarded a text from their landlord about late rent, asking if I knew what was happening. The financial house of cards was collapsing without multiple income streams to prop it up. Marcus revealed something that made my stomach turn. 2 years ago, Trent had borrowed money from him for my birthday gift. I'd never received anything. The theft pattern extended beyond just taking my money. He'd stolen money meant for me too. Jake's sister called, dealing with her own boundary-setting challenges with their parents. I found myself sharing strategies and support, teaching from my hard-won experience. The growth felt tangible. 5 family members created a separate group chat to discuss the situation without my mother's knowledge. The underground network of support grew stronger as more relatives recognized the pattern. Trent's social media guilt trips began backfiring spectacularly. People noticed his expensive sneakers and photos, his new gaming setup visible in the background of his poverty posts. The contradictions spoke louder than his words. Sunday dinner at grandmother's house became a revealing scene. She watched Trent dismiss every job suggestion while complaining about being broke. His excuses ranged from the positions being beneath him to the hours being inconvenient. The hypocrisy was witnessed by all present. Tom, who regularly shopped at the Quick Check where Trent had worked, overheard employees discussing the real reason for his termination. The gossip mill revealed what Trent had hidden. He'd been caught stealing lottery tickets months ago. Unable to resist verifying, Tom asked the Quick Check manager, who happened to be his neighbor. The manager confirmed Trent had indeed been fired for theft, not laid off as he'd claimed. The truth had a way of surfacing. With rent due tomorrow, my mother's calls to relatives grew increasingly desperate. The panic in her voice was real now, the consequences of their choices finally catching up. Family members compared notes on the identical sob stories she pitched to each of them. Extended family began realizing the scope of the deception. My mother had been living rent-free through my payments while crying poverty to everyone else. The double life unraveled thread by thread. I faced a decision about whether to warn her ex-boyfriend about the full extent of the financial deception. After consideration, I chose to simply text him screenshots of my bank statements, showing years of payments. The evidence would speak for itself. Family members started declining my mother's calls after comparing manipulation tactics. The same emotional triggers, the same guilt trips, the same promises used on different relatives. The playbook became obvious once exposed. Aunt Patricia took initiative, hosting a family meeting at her house. She deliberately didn't invite my mother or Trent, creating space for honest discussion without their disruptive presence. The meeting validated my decision to cut financial support. Relatives shared their own stories of manipulation and boundary violations. The collective support felt like a weight lifting from my shoulders. My mother's next move was her most desperate yet. She staged a medical emergency, calling 911 and claiming chest pains. The paramedics found nothing wrong, and neighbors witnessed the performance. The boy who cried wolf had become the mother who cried heart attack. Her ex-boyfriend made his final decision after discovering the extent of the financial deception. He broke up with her, cutting off another income stream. The consequences compounded as each support system recognized the exploitation. Work friends rallied around me, sharing their own experiences with toxic family dynamics. The universality of these struggles created a support network I hadn't expected. Their stories normalized my decision to protect myself. My high school yearbook photo surfaced in the family group chat, shared by a cousin who'd been looking through old pictures. The image showed the truth years of gaslighting had obscured. Trent in designer clothes while I wore obvious hand-me-downs. The visual evidence spoke to a pattern decades in the making. At Aunt Patricia's family meeting, I presented the full financial history. Spreadsheets, bank statements, 5 years of documentation laid out chronologically. Even relatives who'd initially doubted me sat in shocked silence at the scope of the exploitation. My grandmother broke her silence, sharing how my mother had done the same thing to her own siblings decades ago. The pattern stretched back generations, a learned behavior passed down and perfected. The room grew heavy with recognition. More childhood photos emerged from various relatives' collections. Every image told the same story. Trent with new toys, new clothes, new everything, while I stood beside him in faded hand-me-downs. The favoritism had been visible all along to anyone willing to see it. The family collectively decided to stop enabling my mother and Trent's behavior. Boundaries were set, agreements made to support each other in maintaining them. The enabling network that had sustained their lifestyle crumbled. Relatives agreed to check in with each other when contacted for money, creating accountability. No more isolated targets, no more secret shame about being asked for help. The family restructured itself around healthy boundaries. The confrontation I dreaded came on a Thursday evening. My mother showed up at my apartment with Trent, banging on the door. Through the peephole, I could see her theatrical distress. She threatened sewer slide if I didn't help them, loud enough for neighbors to hear. I called 911 immediately, reporting the threat and requesting a wellness check. I refused to open the door or engage with the manipulation. The police arrived within minutes, finding her perfectly healthy but hysterical. Some relatives wavered after hearing about the sewer slide threat, suggesting I should help just this once given the severity. The manipulation worked on those unfamiliar with the pattern. My resolve was tested as family solidarity showed cracks. Standing firm while others panicked required every ounce of strength strength I'd built. I watched some relatives fall back into old patterns, swayed by the ultimate manipulation tactic. The isolation felt familiar but different. This time I'd chosen it to protect myself. I made the difficult decision to go fully no contact, blocking every form of communication. Phone numbers, social media, email, every avenue closed. The silence that followed felt both empty and full of possibility. My mother and Trent shifted focus, targeting the relatives who'd attended Patricia's meeting. The same tactics, the same guilt trips, the same escalating demands. But now these relatives recognized the patterns and held firm. The next morning brought an unexpected development. My grandmother called an emergency family meeting at her house, specifically requesting my presence. The tone in her voice suggested something significant had shifted. I arrived to find most of the extended family already gathered in her living room. My grandmother sat in her favorite armchair, holding a manila folder. She waited until everyone settled before speaking. She opened the folder and pulled out yellowed documents, old bank statements, handwritten IOUs, even a few bounced checks. The dates went back 30 years. My grandmother had kept meticulous records of my mother's financial exploitation of her own siblings. The room fell silent as she passed the papers around. My mother had borrowed thousands from her brother for a medical emergency that never existed. She'd taken money from her sister for Maggie's preschool when I'd attended public school. The pattern was undeniable and decades old. My uncle Nathan, who I'd barely spoken to in years, cleared his throat. He'd always kept his distance from our immediate family, and now I understood why. He shared his own story of lending my mother money for my supposed medical bills when I was 7. He'd later learned I'd never been sick. More relatives came forward with their experiences. Each story followed the same pattern: fabricated emergencies involving me or Trent, borrowed money never repaid, guilt trips when questioned. My mother had been running this con since before I was born. My grandmother then revealed the most shocking detail. She'd hired a private investigator last week after the sewer slide threat incident. The investigator discovered my mother had opened credit cards in my grandmother's name years ago. The fraud had been ongoing. The family made a collective decision. They would support pressing charges for the credit card fraud. My grandmother had already consulted with a lawyer. The evidence was overwhelming. 3 days later, my mother and Trent arrived at my grandmother's house for Thanksgiving dinner. They walked in uninvited, clearly expecting the usual family gathering. Instead, they found the entire family united in their decision. My mother launched into her performance immediately, accusing me of poisoning everyone against her. Trent played his part, claiming I owed him for years of protection. But this time, no one was buying it. The confrontation escalated when Trent, frustrated by the lack of sympathy, accidentally revealed the truth about the MacBook. In his anger, he mentioned saving the money my mother had given him for a new gaming console instead. The admission hung in the air. My grandmother stood up, her 5-foot frame commanding the room. She told them to leave immediately. When my mother tried her tears, my grandmother simply pointed to the door. The matriarch had made her choice. My mother's final manipulation attempt was her ugliest. She turned to me directly, saying I'd regret this when she was gone. The sewer slide threat, veiled but clear. I pulled out my phone and dialed 911, putting it on speaker. She grabbed Trent and left before I could complete the call. The family spent the rest of Thanksgiving dinner in a mixture of relief and processing. Stories continued to surface. Money borrowed from my college textbooks I'd bought myself. Cash for Trent's medical procedures that never happened. The full scope was staggering. My phone remained quiet. The blessed silence of blocked numbers and severed digital ties. But I knew they hadn't given up. Sure enough, they began targeting individual family members. Cousin Marcus received a call claiming they were being evicted tomorrow. Aunt Patricia got a message about Trent needing emergency surgery. My uncle Nathan was told they were living in their car. Each story was more desperate than the last, but the family group chat kept everyone informed and united. The eviction notice came exactly as predicted. With no one left to manipulate for rent money, my mother and Trent faced the consequences of years of financial irresponsibility. They posted about it on social media, trying to shame the family publicly. The posts backfired spectacularly. Comments poured in from their own acquaintances who'd been burned. Former friends shared their own stories of loans never repaid. Trent's ex-coworkers from QuickCheck chimed in about his theft. The truth overwhelmed their narrative. I watched from a distance as their house of cards collapsed. No more safety nets, no more enabling relatives, no more financial hosts to parasitize. They'd created this situation through decades of choices. My mother made one last attempt to reach me through my work email. The message was a masterpiece of manipulation, alternating between threats, guilt, love bombing, and victimhood. I forwarded it to HR and had my work email address changed. Jake and I attended couples counseling to work through the impact of the situation on our relationship. His initial dismissiveness had hurt, but his willingness to understand and grow strengthened our bond. He became my fiercest advocate. The family continued to heal. Aunt Patricia organized regular gatherings that felt different, lighter, healthier. No one walked on eggshells anymore. No one dreaded requests for money. The toxic dynamic had been excised. 3 months passed. I heard through the family grapevine that my mother and Trent had moved to a small apartment in another town. They'd apparently found new targets, a church congregation who didn't know their history. The cycle continued, just with different victims. My grandmother's credit card fraud case moved forward. The prosecutor was confident given the evidence. My mother faced potential jail time. The reality of legal consequences seemed to shock her more than losing her family. I took the money I'd saved from not paying their expenses and finally invested in the Airbnb opportunity myself. My colleague was thrilled to have a reliable partner. The investment began generating passive income within months. The success felt different than I'd imagined. Not triumphant, but peaceful. I'd broken a generational cycle of financial abuse. The money I earned was mine to keep, invest, or spend without guilt or manipulation. My therapy sessions helped me understand the deep programming I needed to overcome. The reflexive guilt when I bought something for myself, the anxiety when I said no to any request, the fear that I was selfish for having boundaries. Slowly, session by session, I rebuilt my sense of self. 6 months after cutting contact, I changed my phone number. Only trusted family and friends received the new one. The symbolic fresh start felt like closing a chapter. I learned my mother had been arrested for the credit card fraud. She spent 3 days in jail before someone, not family, bailed her out. Trent posted angry rants about the injustice, but even his social media followers were dwindling. The Airbnb investment flourished. My first passive income check arrived. Exactly what Trent could have had if he'd listened to my offer that day, instead of demanding a laptop. I deposited it into my savings account. Another step toward the financial security I'd built myself. My chosen family grew stronger. Sarah, Jake, supportive relatives, work friends who'd stood by me. They celebrated my successes without jealousy, supported my struggles without judgment. This was what family should feel like. I ran into an old high school classmate who mentioned seeing Trent. He was working at a gas station, still complaining about his unfair life, still waiting for someone else to save him, still refusing to see his own choices. The restraining order I'd filed after the apartment incident gave me legal protection. My mother had violated it twice, each time facing increasing facing consequences. The law provided what family loyalty never could: firm boundaries with real penalties. My success with the Airbnb investment led to other opportunities. My boss, impressed by my handling of the family crisis, promoted me. Life moved forward in ways it never could while I was anchored to their dysfunction. I celebrated my 28th birthday surrounded by people who actually cared about me. No guilt trips, no demands, no manipulation, just genuine celebration and love. The contrast to previous birthdays was stark. The family meetings at Aunt Patricia's house became monthly traditions. We shared successes, challenges, and support. The toxic elements removed, we discovered what we could be together. Actually supportive, genuinely caring. My mother's legal troubles mounted. Beyond the credit card fraud, investigators found she'd been claiming me as a dependent on taxes for years. The IRS became involved. The consequences she'd avoided for decades arrived all at once. I used my growing financial stability to help cousin Marcus start his business, a loan with clear terms, proper documentation, and realistic repayment plans. Everything my mother's requests had never been. He thrived with the support. The final attempt at contact came through a lawyer. My mother wanted me to drop the fraud charges, claiming family shouldn't prosecute family. I didn't respond. The lawyer seemed unsurprised. 1 year after that confrontation on the doorstep, I stood in my new home, purchased with my own money, in my name only. The Airbnb investment had accelerated my timeline. I'd achieved what they'd always said I was too selfish to deserve. My grandmother passed away peacefully 8 months later. At her funeral, my mother and Trent appeared. They were turned away at the door by family consensus. Even in death, my grandmother's wishes were respected. No toxic presence allowed. The inheritance revealed my grandmother's final protection. She'd left detailed instructions preventing my mother from contesting anything. Every grandchild received equal amounts, except my mother, who got exactly $1 and a note referencing the thousands she'd stolen. I invested my inheritance in expanding the Airbnb business. My partner and I purchased a second property. The passive income grew. Financial freedom felt like breathing freely after years of suffocation. My mother's conviction for credit card fraud resulted in probation and restitution. She owed my grandmother's estate thousands. Trent posted about the injustice online to an increasingly small audience. Their narrative had lost all power. The therapy continued, peeling back layers of programming. I learned to recognize manipulation tactics in others, to trust my instincts, to value my own needs. The healing wasn't linear, but it was real. 2 years later, I married Jake in a small ceremony surrounded by chosen family. My mother and Trent weren't invited. Their absence felt like presence. The presence of peace, of joy without conditions, of celebration without guilt. The wedding gifts went toward our future, not stolen for someone else's present. Every decision was ours to make. Every success was ours to keep. The freedom still felt surreal sometimes. I heard they'd moved again, burned through another church congregation's goodwill. The pattern continued endlessly. New victims, same tactics, inevitable exposure, forced relocation. They'd chosen this cycle over growth. My Airbnb empire, as Jake jokingly called it, expanded to 5 properties. I hired my first employee. The business I'd tried to gift to Trent had become my path to financial independence. The irony wasn't lost on me. Success meant being able to help others without depleting myself. I mentored young women dealing with family financial abuse. My story helped them recognize patterns, set boundaries, choose themselves. The cycle could be broken. 3 years after no contact, I felt genuinely free. The guilt had faded. The reflexive anxiety when my phone rang had disappeared. I'd rebuilt myself from the foundation up, stronger and clearer than before. My mother aged rapidly under the weight of consequences. Photos on social media showed someone bitter and worn. Trent remained unchanged, still entitled, still waiting for rescue, still blaming everyone else. They'd become cautionary tales in our family. The investment property portfolio grew. Each success built on the last. The money I'd poured into their dysfunction now built my future. Every rent check they demanded had been transformed into assets in my name. I published an article about financial abuse in families. The response overwhelmed me. Thousands of people sharing similar stories. The isolation I'd felt was an illusion. We were legion, all of us choosing ourselves over our abusers. My chosen family celebrated every milestone. Real support looked like champagne toast for promotions, not demands for the raise money. It looked like offers to help move, not expectations of free labor. It looked like joy for my success, not calculations of what they could extract. The family reunions at Aunt Patricia's grew larger as estranged relatives felt safe returning. My mother's absence had created space for genuine connection. We'd all been victims of the same pattern, now healing together. 5 years after that doorstep confrontation, I achieved complete financial freedom. The Airbnb investments generated enough passive income to cover all my expenses. I could work because I chose to, not because I had to. The dream I'd wanted to give Trent had become my reality. I kept the spreadsheet documenting the $47,000 I'd given them, not out of bitterness, but as a reminder. Every dollar had been a lesson. Every payment had been a step toward this moment, the tuition for the hardest education I'd ever received. My mother and Trent faded into the background of my life. Occasional updates through the family grapevine. Another eviction, another burned bridge, another failed manipulation. They'd become strangers living out consequences I no longer cushioned. The little girl who'd sold all her toys to win approval had grown into a woman who knew her worth. The journey from doormat to business owner had been paved with boundaries. Every no had been a brick in the foundation of my new life. I thought about that Burger King coupon sometimes, their last gift to me. It perfectly encapsulated our entire relationship. Worthless, thoughtless, and something I couldn't even use. I'd kept it as a reminder of why I'd walked away. My success wasn't about revenge. It was about reclamation. Every dollar earned was a choice to value myself. Every investment was a vote for my future. Every boundary was an act of self-love the little girl in me had never been allowed. The family I'd built, blood relatives who'd chosen growth and found family who'd shown up consistently, gathered often. Our celebrations had no strings attached. Our support came without invoices. Our love didn't require payment. I sometimes wondered what might have been if they'd made different choices. If my mother had been grateful instead of entitled. If Trent had been appreciative instead of demanding. But that wondering was brief. Their choices had led me to mine. The Airbnb empire continued growing. I hired Marcus as my property manager. Aunt Patricia's daughter joined as my accountant. We built something together. A family business based on trust and mutual respect. Everything my mother's manipulations had never been. 10 properties, 20. The passive income multiplied. Each success proved what I'd always suspected. I wasn't selfish for wanting my own life. I was human. The programming that said otherwise had been a lie designed to keep me compliant. My mother's story became a cautionary tale in our extended family. Parents used it to teach children about consequences. Her lifetime of manipulation had become her only legacy, a warning to others about the price of exploiting family love. The woman who'd once cried in her car after being berated for not buying a MacBook now signed contracts for investment properties. The transformation felt like justice, not because they suffered, but because I'd thrived despite them. Every family gathering at Aunt Patricia's Trisha's house reinforced the same truth. This was what family should be: supportive without being enabling, loving without being blind, connected without being enmeshed. We'd all learned from my mother's negative example. The restraining order expired eventually. They made no attempt to contact me. Perhaps they'd finally found permanent new victims. Perhaps they'd run out of energy. Perhaps they'd realized I was truly gone. It didn't matter anymore. My business expanded beyond rentals into property development. The little girl who'd been forced to give away her yard sale money now signed checks for construction crews. Every signature was an affirmation. I deserved success. The family meeting where everything had unraveled became legend. Grandmother's courage in revealing decades of documentation. The family's unity in facing truth. My mother's shock at consequences finally catching up. It marked the moment everything changed. I funded scholarships for young women escaping financial abuse. The full circle felt complete. From victim to victor to helping others victory. The money that had once disappeared into their black hole now lifted others toward freedom. My story ended not with their destruction, but with my construction. I'd built a life, a business, a family of choice. The foundation was boundaries. The frame was self-respect. The roof was the love of people who valued me for me, not my bank account. The girl who'd been programmed to ask, how much should I give away, had become a woman who knew exactly what she was worth. And that worth had nothing to do with money, and everything to do with finally, fully, choosing herself.